Hello, my name is Jožek, and in this tutorial series I show you how to make a combat system using a finite state machine and new input system from Unity. In the fourth part we will see how to set up the enemy model and animations, how to create an enemy script for the AI, and how to create a basic player health system. If you find this video helpful, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next part. Alright, I'm here at my scene, so I have a character that can walk, that can draw his weapon, and that can deal damage to this capsule. Of course, this capsule is looking at the moment really boring, so let's replace him by a skeleton warrior, which will be the enemy now. For that I'm using the low poly medieval skeleton free pack from the Unity asset store. You can just import it, and under Polytop Studio, low poly medieval characters, prefabs, unique NPCs, you can find this skeleton warrior here. Now I replaced already here the his hands, well not replaced, but I inserted some weapons and shields, and you can just delete them here, or I just delete them, yeah, of course, in the prefab editor here. And so like you will find them skeleton like this. And then under Polytop Studio weapons there are two prefabs for the sword and shield, and you just have to drag and drop the sword and shield prefab to the corresponding slot. So he's holding the weapon on the right hand, so you go under right shoulder, and then you find there somewhere the right hand weapon slot. Just drag and drop the sword to this one, and then on the left hand you have like a large shield slot, left hand weapon slot, and of course it's the shield slot that we are using here, and voila, that's it already. Now this will be our object now for the enemy, so we are deleting the bad enemy capsule here. Don't need it anymore, just delete it. This will be our, let's call it skeleton warrior, and it already has an animator, but the animator controller is missing, so let's create an animator controller. So I go into assets, animations, and here we have animator controller, enemy animator, and just drag and drop it in here. Also overwrite because it's already prefab, and of course the collider is now missing, and we add just a capsule collider like always for an humanoid. I think it has the height 1.8 and then the center in the middle, so 0.9. Yes, that's looking good. And the radius, let's shrink it down a bit, 3.5. Again, overwrite. Make sure that under the layout you have chosen enemy. That's really, yes, and all children's. Apply all. Awesome, let's try it out if we can also deal damage now to this game object. Okay, there's some things not working there, but we can deal damage, as you can see on the left corner or here in the console. So what's going on there? And of course it's because there are no animations currently playing here in our animator, or the enemy animator here. So which animation are we using? Well, I'm using the animations we have already imported in the previous video, and they are from Kevin Iglesias. So let's go to import Kevin Iglesias, and we have here the animations for a melee warrior. So these are really handy. We have here the combat idle animation that we are using, and also the take damage animation, which are now really important. Later there will also be the right hand attack animation when the skeleton is trying to attack. So let's set them up. Alright, so again, as always, for the movement we are using a blend tree. Now this will be much easier, this locomotion. Yeah, let's call it also locomotion. And there will be two states which can represent by this speed value here. So let's also immediately change this one to speed, which goes from 0 to 1, and I will make a motion field with two motions. from 0 to 1. And for the first one is of course the combat idle animation, combat idle 0 1, and here the running, the forward. Okay, one with root motion and one without. We are taking the one without root motion. Sprint, but that we are not using. We do run forward without root motion. 1 0 1 forward. Alright, and now we can play. We can see already he's in idle state, and then when he's trying to move, we are changing this speed value, and then he's moving. Alright, don't forget to save this one. Now when he takes damage, then we are playing the damage animation, which we also take from this package. And we can also find it here, not the death one, but this one, the take damage one we are using. So I'm just drag and dropping it here, and we make a transition from take damage, and then from any state. So it can be in like an attack state, it can be like in the idle state or moving state. He's always taking damage in any state, and then he's going to play this take damage one. Of course, there need to be a condition, so we are triggering it with if damage is true or just a trigger, because you don't need a take damage false, so that's why trigger is much better here. Ah yeah, by the way, I'm using always a small, not capital but small letters on the beginning, so speed damage, when damage is triggered. So then he takes this damage and goes back to the idle locomotion. Just make sure that this one does not have an exit time and this one has an exit time without any conditions. And now let's just set up also the attack, so right hand attack one for later. And we are already finished with the enemy animator. Just we have a transition here. This one is when he's actually attacking, so let's just have a new trigger which is called attack, and this one has to be triggered here, attack, and without any condition, any exit time. Now, of course, this one has exit time, and then it goes back. So he's doing his attack, and then he's go back to idle or moving. And that's already the animator. Awesome. Let's try it out. See, he is now in the idle state. And now when I try to attack him, he should play then the dealt damage animation, which is not playing. So let's fix that. For that, I go into my skeleton warrior game object here, and I'm creating an enemy script. And I open it up. Now in the enemy class we have already a couple of functions here. Let's go through it. So the first variable is of course health. I've set it now to 3, so that means like after 3 hits the enemy will die. We have a reference to the player game object and to the animator. Well, we get the animator with get component animator, and we get the reference to the player now we find with tag player. This is important for later, just I leave it just here in the beginning, but of course later in this tutorial we will see why we are using this player reference. Then here's the take damage function with the float damage amount, which is currently set just to 1, as I said, and then we can change it later if we have some armor values or if we have like different weapons, so this weapon deals more damage and so on. So for now it's just like 3 hits. Every time we are hitting, we're dealing damage, this health goes 1 down, and when it is smaller or equal to 0, then the enemy will die, and we call the die function, which is also currently just destroying this game object. But here we can also like spawn a ragdoll object that makes then some cool animations, or even we can trigger here just a death animation. And also while we are taking damage, we of course then triggering our damage variable from the animator. Let's save this and go back to Unity, and we can overwrite the script and go to our player DamageDealer class, because we are there now triggering the take damage function from the enemy. So we can find this one in our scripts folder from the previous video, DamageDealer class. So I'm here at the DamageDealer class, and we can see that we have here this has the damage contain if statement. We are just here printing, well, we have dealt damage. but of course there is much better if we can call here the function. So let me change this one. So I change it now, and you can see that we are trying to get the component of an enemy class. So that's when we hit the game object, we are always checking, oh, does it has the enemy component, but of course this one is very handy if we want to hit something different, like a tree, and you want to play there some sound or effects, then you can always differentiate if you have really an enemy that where there was a blood particle effect, or is there just a tree where there will be some dust particles. Again, here this is the same. If we check, has it already dealt damage, and so on and so on. Then we are calling the enemy.takeDamage function, and with our weapon damage. Our weapon damage is, as I said, just set to 1, so we can also increase it here. And this one is the same. So let's try it out. Let's see if the animations are played. And yes, our skeleton takes damage, goes to animation, and after 3 hits he dies. So of course that's not so really interesting if the enemy is not attacking us and is not hunting us when we're coming too close. So for that we have to change a bit our previous enemy class, which is actually not so difficult. Just go into skeleton, and we are using here the NavMesh agent from Unity. So our enemy is now a NavMesh agent, and here you have some values then we can change later. If we can see, like the stopping distance is set to 0, that is when player is done moving to then the enemy is moving to the player and just stopping when it's exactly at this position. That's not what we want, so we can change this immediately now to 2, because we want that there will be some distance here. Also like speed, acceleration, that we can change always later. Now that's also important to say, like where is actually where can the enemy, where can it move. So we have to use this navigation window here, which you can find in the window, and then AI navigation, you can find it, and we can see that you have to render this area where it can already move. I've done this already. So in the here agent and break settings, you can change this one and just click on break. This means that now all the NavMesh agents can move on these areas, and you can see you can change it so that he cannot move here on the mountains and so on. But now for this tutorial, just make it like with these default values. You can see you cannot walk through the trees and through the stones here. Alright, let's move back to our enemy class here in the inspector, and let's change there some function. Alright, I'm here now again in the enemy class. So we have changed here some variables, and have here a header for combat. So this is all the variables that have to do with combat. Like attack cooldown is time between the attacks. The attack range is when he's at 1 unit far away he starts attacking. The aggro range, when the player is 4 units away he starts to move after the player. Again, reference to the player, to the agent, animator. Time passed between the attacks, then time passed between the attacks. And here the new destination cooldown is the time we are waiting between each reset for the destination. So the destination is the player. This is used so we are not changing like every frame the destination for the agent. And in the update function we are setting the speed value. So from the animator set float, with the dot set float function we are setting the speed to the agent velocity dot agent.velocity.magnitude divided by agent.speed. This is to normalize it, so we have always a value between 0 and 1. The agent.speed is actually the speed that the agent has, his maximum speed, which we can change in the inspector, and the agent.velocity.magnitude is the speed that's more like the velocity that the agent actually really has. This can be a maximum for value from speed, and it can be minimum value 0. So with dot magnitude we get only a float. not a vector 3. Now when the time is greater or equal to the attack cooldown, then we are checking if he is in the distance from the attack range, and if that's true, then we attack. And we're setting the time pass again to 0, so that we can always attack between these attack cooldowns. So that means now here we can attack every 3 seconds. And then of course just a loop here that we can time.delta time, so that when times pass every frame, then we can really check this one that it goes every 3 seconds he's attacking. Then when the cooldown, the new destination cooldown is smaller or equal to 0, and we are checking again with the station, so when he's in the aggro range, then we are setting the new destination, which is position from the player, and again we are doing this every half a second. And of course he has to rotate to look at the player. So with transform.look@, we are rotating the enemy so that he's looking at the player. We have again our die and our take damage function as previous, so nothing new. But I have also here now an onDraw gizmo function. So with the red color we are showing the attack range, and with the yellow color we are showing the aggro range. So this is very handy for debugging if it's actually working and so on. So let's try it out in the editor. And we can see that the enemy is actually really moving off the layer. So when I go out of my aggro range here, as we can see, he's not hunting, but he's still rotating. So we can also change this, that it is only rotating as soon as he's in the aggro range. You could change that like you want. And as soon as I'm in this aggro range, he is moving after me. And when I'm close enough, he will attack. There's like a dead zone here where he's not attacking. The distance where he stops moving is set to 2, so I can minimize this, or his range where he's attacking, I can increase that a bit. Let me show you this one. You can change it as you want, of course. I have here the attack range. Okay, let's increase it, and now you see he's actually attacking me every 3 seconds. Well, this looks actually good, so let's keep it at this 1.5, and let's also increase his attack cooldown to 2. Now we see another problem. Actually, with this look@, function, he's rotating a bit, and we can simply fix that by here apply root motion to deselect this one, because this rotation comes from the root motion and we don't want that. So let's try it again. And now you can see that he's not rotating there, but he's a bit floating, so we could change the height also, and then this works now much better. Alright, our player wants to take some damage, so we're creating a new layer and calling it the damage layer. Now these animations will overwrite the current combat and base layer, and the animation we are using here is from the post-sword and shield package, the impact 2 animation, this one. So we name it like player damage. We make sure that big into pose is set here, and original apply, and then we can already drag this animation here. But of course we don't want to play this one here when we enter this layer, but for that we're using an empty state, calling it default, and we set it to the default layer state, set as layer default state. So now we want, when we take some damage, we want to trigger this one so that this animation is played, and then after it's finished we go back to our default state. So then make sure that this one has an exit time, and here we want a condition, so when we actually take damage, I've created it already here, damage. So let's set this condition to true. Damage is true, then this one gets triggered, we take some damage, and then we go back to the default state. Make sure that it's not clicked on looped here. Loop time is unchecked. We are actually dealing some damage by the enemy with our sword. We have the DamageDealer class, so we have to do something similar here for the enemy. Let's say when we have here our sword prefab, open it up here in the prefabs. It's this sword here. We're actually going to create here also an enemy DamageDealer class. With here, let's create in the prefab editor, create an enemy DamageDealer, and then marker. that's where we start with we will draw then our line, and then when the player touches this line, then he will get some damage. So that's our marker where we start. And under this game object we will create a new script called the enemy damage dealer script. Let's create it and let's open it up. So as you can see here in the DamageDealer class, it looks very similar to our DamageDealer class. Also the damage here has dealt damage, 2 booleans that we can check, weapon length, weapon damage, can deal damage is set to false in the start function. Then the update function, we check can we actually deal damage, has this weapon already dealt damage, and so on. Checking now the layer from 1 to 8 instead of 1 to 9. That's the difference when we go to the damage dealer here, 1 to 9, so we are ignoring the player, and here of course we are looking for the player, so it goes only from 1 to 8. Then when we hit, we can say their damage. Of course this will also change as soon as we have a health system, which we also cover in this tutorial, in this part. And the start deal damage and end deal damage function that we can trigger in animation event. Now let's get back to the editor. Now we have here the weapon length. Let's set it to something like let's say 80, make it a bit larger, and then damage to 1 just for testing purposes. Now you can see already here on this yellow line on the weapon on the skeleton. So when we touch this one, the player gets damage. And of course we have to check the start deal damage functions, and we do this by the enemy script. We will trigger these functions. Make sure that for in the animation controller we have there to use the functions which are on the same game object. So we have here enemy, and as you can see that's one we have created before. We will here insert this function same as for the DamageDealer class. Here are the functions, start deal damage, and we're going to check get competent children. So with the class enemy DamageDealer, this will be our weapon of course, and then we start deal damage. The same for the end deal damage, with here end deal damage in it. So now this function will get triggered in animation event. So we go back to the editor and let's find our attack. And you go down here, we go to events, then let's say we start at this one here, create new event, start deal damage, and we finish right here, end deal damage. Click apply and let's check if it works. So yes, when we are at the tip of the sword we can see enemy has dealt damage. Awesome, it works. Now of course this looks a bit static, so we want also the player to play his animation here, this animation that we play has dealt some damage. Then for that we are creating an health system. So we go under our player. Let's create a new script, calling it health system, and let's open it up. So that's the health system. Well, it's currently really simple. The player has like 100 health, which we can change of course. And we have a reference to the animator, and when we see here we can trigger a function like take damage, and when we trigger it, it will get minus the damage amount here from the health. We can also trigger here the damage variable in the animator, and of course when the health is 0 we die, and die is just like here destroy this game object. Now this function here take damage we will actually set to public because we want to call this from our DamageDealer class, or more like the enemy DamageDealer class. So let's go to the enemy DamageDealer class. So here instead of course just printing enemy has dealt damage, we are now triggering this function. First we are checking if the target that we hit actually has this component health system, and when it has this component health, then we are triggering the take damage function and putting in the weapon damage, which is currently just set to 1, but this will work, and has dealt damage to true. So let's go to the editor and try this. And as you can see, the player is actually not taking some damage because we have missed something. We have to set the rate to 1, and now you see that we're taking damage. However, this is looking not so great to be, because when you're moving it's also overwriting the feet, and we actually want the player to stay normally on the feet, exactly like this one here. See? So what we can do is we can create a body mask which will overwrite only the upper part of the player. So let's create that. Of course, also set the weight here to 1. Here we can put in the avatar mask. We go to animation and create an avatar mask. Call it body. Humanoid. And then uncheck everything. Oh, I double click on the side. And only check the upper part. Alright, then drag it in here. No, doesn't work. Type in here, body, and let's try it again. We have to be at the tip, and now you see it's only the upper part. So if you prefer this one here, then of course you can also just change the animation there like you want, like you prefer. And let's kill it. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any question, feel free to ask them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the 5th part where we see how to add particle effects, camera shake and a ragdoll for the enemy. See you in the next video. Bye. Ouch. Ouch. Now it's my turn. 1, 2, 3. Boom. Awesome.